All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And inshallah, today we're going to continue what we had started out with yesterday, which is وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ قَالُوا حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. So this was relevant. We talked about it yesterday. We're just going to summarize what we did yesterday. And it's relevant with the ayah before it because it basically was responding to their claim that the reason why they were doing these practices of course, designating certain animals for Allah or for the gods was basically because it was a practice coming from their ancestors, and they did not want to leave that practice. So then the ayah responds to them. If they were told to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet, they would have said it's enough, and they would basically consider that their only resource that was legitimate was going to be coming from their ancestors. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically objects to that and responds, well, their own ancestors did not have the data, did not have the information to basically claim that such animals were to be dedicated, or such a practice was considered as a legitimate practice, and وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ, and they were misguided, or they were not guided. And we talked about this ayah, and we said a couple lessons to learn from this. Number one, to learn from this that the Quran and the Sunnah are basically the first resources that we would go back to consider whether something is legitimate, or whether something is ethical, or whether something is appropriate, etc. We would first go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Number two, we would also understand and figure out or read the data that such a practice or such a thing or whatever it is, and the data that comes with it, and what we get out of it, and certainly find how we can maximize the benefit, whether we're speaking about the benefit in this dunya or in the akhirah. But certainly it must not contradict what was sent on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If the data is, or the interpretation, if any of these are contradicting il-wahi, then what that would mean is that our data in a collection and our interpretation for that data is definitely wrong, and certainly needs rereading, whether we're reading the data or whether we are reinterpreting if it the information that our data had collected, and it must go in parallel with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam / with the legal maxims. So we went in details with that. Number two, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ. And عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ, and all you who believe, that your focus and your priority should be about yourself, and it should not harm you if others were to go astray when you are basically finding guidance. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him is all the return, is all. We took it from the word jami'a, فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ, and we said the letter fa is different than the letter thumma, because thumma actually means there's a time lapse. The letter fa means it's an immediate transition. In other words, we're talking about the chronology here. يُنَبِّئُكُمْ, فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ, يُنَبِّئُكُمْ. The word أنبأ is different than أخبر, and is different than أعلم. Okay? Because when you look at the word أخبر, it's to give you information about something, to basically give you a khabar. It's to inform you of something, usually in the past. And anba'a is usually of something where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right there, for example, عن النبأ العظيم. So in naba is basically an information of something magnificent. Okay, so that's why when it said عن النبأ العظيم, النبأ would be about a magnificent information, about a magnificent, so here, النبأ itself actually means magnificent information. And al-azim also means magnificent. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to demonstrate the magnitude of what was basically about to happen, which is Yawm al-Qiyamah. So here, فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ is also speaking about the magnitude of such information that we would be getting on Judgment Day, because it is of serious information, it is of a serious event, and therefore it is in itself a naba. It's a very serious, and a magnified, definitely, we're speaking about not exaggerated to mean something that is like a hyperbole. This isn't a hyperbole, but this is to say that this demonstrates and reflects something that in itself is magnificent. Okay, so فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. He would basically inform you of a magnificent thing, which basically was all your deeds. It's the deeds that you had presented during life, during your test in this dunya, and now you're being asked about it. Now it is basically scrutinized. Noura, go ahead, dear.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you could break down that word فَيُنَبِّئُكَ.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I will do.
فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ.
Okay, let me break it down then. So here we go.
I just wondered what the fa.
Okay, so let's do it. So the root is, you know what? Let's do it on a word. That way we could see it in colors, right? And that way. Okay, so here we go. And the way that you could see it, the root is basically going to be naba'a. Okay, then you're going to say fayu nabi ukum. Okay, now we're going to make this one really large so you could see all those words and what you're actually doing. Okay, so the actual word is going to be na, ba, and a. I know it's an u. That's because of its place in the grammatical place. Okay, but this is the root. So therefore, the different additions. Okay, the different additions are going to be the fa. Here we go. So this fa would be an addition, which basically is to resemble the immediate transition to something. And the letter ya is going to basically mean continuation, which is al-mudara. And the kum would basically be in relationship to telling us about al-jama'a. So that would be for the group. So the root is the yellow, and the other ones, each letter is going to resemble something else. Okay, so the fa, remember, it resembles a transition, an immediate transition. The ya resembles continuation. The kum resembles the group. In other words, we're speaking about not a singular, but we're talking about a plural. Okay? Now we see it?
Jazakallah khair. Yeah. So right away, the fa. Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Right. So let's just assume that it didn't say فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ, and then it said ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُكُمْ. ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُكُم. So then that thumma would indicate that there was going to be some time of like a transition that was a pause, or there was not an immediate transition. It took some time lapse till it got to that new thing, to that new state.
I remember you said that a long time ago. Jazakallah khair.
Right, so that would be thumma. Let's say وَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ. Let's just assume it said وَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ. Okay, so if we're talking about وَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ, All right, let's go for wa and just replace it right there, okay? Not وَيُنَبِّئُكُمُ. Okay, doesn't want to do the home part. Okay, so let's just assume it said وَيُنَبِّئُكُم. The wa scholars had differences of opinions on the letter wa, whether it means a time lapse, and most scholars do not believe that it means a time lapse. And most scholars believe that it is just harf atf to mean that it's an addition and doesn't necessarily indicate any transition in terms of timing. Okay, so just wanted to note that one. So this is just kind of like a وَيُنَبِّئُكُم, and it's giving you a then or and then, and not necessarily a transition. Other scholars, they considered that no, it gives more than just a than just an addition, but it also means like a new mark, or at least a that it's giving you, what is the word, not a gradual thing, but it's giving you the transition, but not necessarily the time lapse. So if I were to say فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, for example, is this necessarily mean a particular order, or is this necessarily not meaning a particular order, but just giving me just an addition? And that's why scholars had differences of opinions because of the letter wa on whether the items or the organs or the extremities that we're washing, whether they have to be in order, or whether I can wash my feet first, or I can wash my face first. It doesn't matter on which order that I do it in. Why?
Because of the wa.
Because of the letter wa. Okay, so I guess that's a little deeper, but you took me there, Noura. Okay, let's go and continue.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So we also talked about the different hadith that relate to having the proper understanding, the proper tafsir, which is this one, because the majority are going to misunderstand the tafsir, thinking that what it is telling us, that we don't have to do da'wah, we don't have to do ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad, as long as we're doing what's fine, we're doing what's right. Don't worry about other people. And we had seen that the Sahaba, just like in this ayah, were basically explaining that not necessarily that's not what it means, and certainly that this would be a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding for the ayah if we were to understand it, that we did not have to worry about people's wrongdoings as long as we're doing what is right. And we went in details with what Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had basically said in his oration. And he said, "I'tamiru bil ma'rufi wa tanahaw 'anil munkar." So that would mean basically we would have to order for what is good and forbid what is bad. But certainly, if we're speaking about a common practice, people are not listening. You had done your duty basically in ordering for what is good and forbidding what is evil. But then still, people are insisting. You do your job, and the rest is their responsibility. That takes me to the ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us about the three groups that of Bani Israel, and when one group was basically doing their piece of da'wah, the other groups were not doing their piece of da'wah, and the groups that were Muslim but not doing their piece of da'wah, and they would approach the ones that were doing their da'wah, they would tell them, why are you giving them da'wah? You know that they're not going to respond. You know that they're not going to accept and embrace what you're saying. And they basically had said, مَعْذِرَةً إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. It's basically ma'ذِرة, in other words, just an excuse in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we had done our job, we had done and submitted our duty. إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. At the end, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ, perhaps one day they would get into taqwa, they would recognize what da'wah is given to them, And that would be, in other words, لعلهم يتقون. The word لعل is basically called حرف ترج. What is حرف ترج? حرف الترجي, it basically means that there's hope in it. There is hope. So they didn't lose hope in giving da'wah. They might have lost hope in the people, but they didn't lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لعلهم يتقون. Maybe they will have taqwa. Maybe this will move their integrity, their religious integrity. Maybe this will get them into remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's the best that we could do. There's nothing more that they would, there's nothing more that I would basically have to do other than continue doing my da'wah. Shuhan muta'an, we talked about in details. We also went in details with this hadith. إنكم في زمان من ترك منكم عشر ما أمر به هلك ثم يأتي زمان زمان من عمل منهم بعشر ما أمر به نجا. And we said that this hadith basically is mursal according to some scholars, munkar according to others, but we also talked about and we even drew it right there, kind of gave like a graph, and we said before they were doing basically almost everything that was ordered, required of them, mandated of them, in doing everything, or at least avoiding everything that was considered as prohibited. But then during our times, of course, they would probably struggle with 1/10 of basically the religious prescription, but during our times, of course, they would still be considered as halak. They would be considered as they were liable, they were held accountable, but then during our times, you would see that someone could only probably be doing 1/10 of what they were doing and be considered as naja. What is naja? Naja actually means saved. Naja means to basically get into surviving, basically. So they would survive basically in the akhirah, meaning that they would survive not being in hellfire and they would make it to Jannah. That's what naja means. Okay, and we talked about hadithun gharib and what that means based on the technical term of Tirmidhi. And let's see, continue this page. And he said, وَرُوِيَ. Now, whenever you would see ruwiya, what are you going to think of? You're going to think of, let's see right there, and telling you that this is 1, mursal, 2, that there's an indication that this is not necessarily authentic. Now, what is that supposed to tell us? Even though Al-Qurtubi himself was more of a mufassir, but you could see that his tafsir was indicating that he had great ilm in tafsir, as in hadith as well, in lugha arabiya as well. Certainly his lugha arabiya isn't like al-Alusi, for example, or maybe Zamakhshari, not compared to them, but certainly you could see that he had a magnificent ilm in that as well. And when you see Ruwiya an Ibn Mas'ud, that means he had done his research to see that this was not necessarily in the highest level of authenticity. Okay, an Ibn Mas'ud. Who's Ibn Mas'ud? Ibn Mas'ud is basically Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He is the Sahabi who was the 6th to become Muslim. He was known for his, I guess we could say, his small-sized body. He was definitely not necessarily an extra large, definitely not a 2X, definitely very small, perhaps extra small to the point that the Sahaba, when he had fell off the tree, the Prophet ﷺ, he had seen them laughing at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's ankle because it was so tiny, and the Prophet ﷺ said his own ankle would weigh more than the mountain of Uhud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was also, of course, was also one of the Sahaba. Not only was he the 6th to become Muslim, but he was also of importance that he was also one of those that that scribed the Quran. What did he say? ليس هذا بزمان هذه الآية قولوا الحق ما قبل منكم فإذا رد عليكم فعليكم أنفسكم. Okay, what did he want to say? He basically wanted to respond to those that misunderstood this ayah, thinking that we don't have to do our piece of da'wah because we basically can see this quote here telling us لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم, so we don't have to worry about that. Ibn Mas'ud, even though the narration is not authentic, but still al-Qurtubi used that as a quote to let us know that even though it's not authentic, but let us know that there are numerous indications that we cannot necessarily claim that we can stop our piece of da'wah simply because the majority is not accepting our call to basically the da'wah. And he said, quote, "This is not the time for this ayah. Say the truth as long as it is accepted from you. If it was rejected from you, then that's when you would worry about yourself. So you would, if it's rejected, they're not accepting it, then you would basically just worry about yourself, make sure your kids are doing the right thing, just make sure you're doing what you need to do, etc. But what about now? Is this the time for that ayah? The answer is no. Let's see why it's not time for this ayah. قيل لابن عمر في بعض أوقات الفتن لو تركت القول في هذه الأيام فلم تأمر ولم تنهى فقال إن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لنا ليبلغ الشاهد الغائب ونحن شهدنا فيلزمنا أن نبلغكم وسيأتي زمان إذا قيل فيه الحق لم يقبل. Let's say Abdullah ibn Umar. Who's Abdullah ibn Umar? Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab. And what awqat al-fitan are we talking about? What time of fitna? Is this talking about the time of fitna was basically the time when when Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan were basically fighting over, it wasn't, by the way, it wasn't fighting on a certain it wasn't fighting over the Khilafah. They weren't fighting on who wants to be the Khalifa, by the way. They were fighting, should we prioritize searching for the ones that basically had killed Uthman bin Affan, or should we prioritize finding a Khalifa? Which one should come first? So they weren't fighting over the Khilafah. They were really fighting over, well, what comes first? And it was definitely a fitna. It was a fitna. You had even the Sahaba, one considered that, no, this is a priority. The other one considered that that's a priority. And of course, Abdullah ibn Umar was told, well, maybe you should have just not said anything during that time, basically the time of fitna, and you didn't order anyone or avoid anyone from engaging in any of this. And he said the Prophet ﷺ had told us that the person that was a witness, the person that was present, was supposed to be informing those that were absent, and we were present. Then therefore, our responsibility, our duty is to inform you. There's going to come a time where the truth is going to be announced, but then people will not accept it. Let's look at number 3 right there. And he said that this basically is ليبلغ الشاهد الغائب, that this piece of quote, which Ibn Umar himself, ليبلغ الشاهد الغائب, was actually a quote that the Prophet ﷺ himself had said in various narrations. We had seen that this was actually part of an oration or a ceremony that the Prophet ﷺ had given during Hajj. Okay, let's say, so that was narrated by Ahmad with this number hadith, narrated by al-Bukhari, narrated by Muslim, which from hadith Abi Bakr, which actually tells us it's an authentic hadith, at least this quote of it, and therefore, is it a shahid to mean the person that is present, or is it a person that is also witnessing that this is the truth? So if you are a witness that this is the truth, i.e., that is Islam, then therefore you've got a responsibility to basically announce it to those and inform those that were not aware, that were basically not witnessing Islam. You have a responsibility to basically inform, bring awareness. So what about if it's not necessarily a disbeliever? What if it's a Muslim? They don't know, or they might know the Islamic ruling, and that's the same thing. They too would fall within this ayah that you've got a responsibility to inform the truth of basically the details of the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether the person is Muslim or whether the person is not Muslim, because at the end you've got a responsibility to basically announce the truth, even if it is not accepted. But if it becomes a common practice, people know the truth, but they don't want to apply it, that's when you would take that ayah and say, well, I told them. They didn't. I tried my best and I talked to them. I did my maw'idha. I sent them videos. I sent them books. I talked to them personally. I basically explained the analogy behind it. I explained the consequence in this dunya, in the akhirah, and now they don't want to accept. That's when you would say, well, لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. There's nothing more that I could do. I did my duty. I basically had done all that I could do to help them find guidance. But then that's when I would apply لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. You would not be harmed if you were on guidance and they chose misguidance. You had done your responsibility. Now the best is basically on them. Let's look at in the other narration. ليبلغ الشاهد الغائب فكنا نحن الشهود وأنتم الغيب. But this ayah, ولكن هذه الآية لأقوام يجيئون من بعدنا إن قالوا لم يقبل منهم. Let's see right there. You could say that this is narrated by al-Tabari. I would like to say something about al-Tabari. One thing about Tafseer al-Tabari is that it is basically called as a Tafseer bil-Ma'thur. What does that mean? Let me put that right there and write that down. What does a Tafseer bil-Ma'thur really mean? A Tafseer bil-Ma'thur. What does that mean? So a Tafseer bil-Ma'thur, you could do Quranic exegesis or you could do tafsir and interpret the Quran based on the language, based on the words, based on the etymology of certain words, based on hadith, which is tafsir bil-ma'thur. Tafsir bil-ma'thur is going based on a hadith, going based on the Sahaba, basically in what they had said. That's ma'thur. And you could also do mawdu'i. You're taking different basically subjects, you're relating this ayah, how is it related to the previous ayah? So you're taking it as a general concept and you're trying to understand the subjects and how they relate to one another. You're trying to derive the themes within those ayat, etc. The best of the tafsir is basically the tafsir bil-ma'thur. That's the best way to do tafsir. And that's why Tafseer al-Tabari actually ranks as the most important tafsir. Why? Because every single tafsir, every single wording that he would want to do tafsir for, he would lay out all these different narrations that had said that this is what this means, and will lay out the narrations, including their chain of narration. Now, al-Tabari himself died 210 years year Hijriya. So he was not far from the Prophet ﷺ's time. So you could see that because he died 210 year Hijriya, he basically had a number of different narrations that he was capable of going back to. He basically had a number of chain of narrations that he was capable of collecting. So we're talking about 10 huge, underline the word huge, volumes. Yes, they're skinny volumes, but they're still 10 because they're really long. And that's basically Tafseer al-Tabari. And just a note about it. So when you look at Akhrajahu al-Tabari, we're basically looking at Tafseer al-Tabari, and it was like a hadith book, but in reality it was a tafsir book, but it contained certain narrations that other books did not contain. Okay, so just to note that. Okay, let's see. The quote, he said, where was it? Where was it? Is this it? Yes, this one. Yes, right there. In a narration upon Ibn Umar that he had quoted, لِيُبَلِّغْ الشَّاهِدُ الْغَائِبِ, let the person that is present and for the person that was absent. And he said, we were the ones that were present / witnessing this, and you were basically absent. You were not aware of this. But this ayah is for people that would come after us. If إن قالوا لم يقبل منهم, if they were to inform, if they were to do their piece of da'wah, no one would accept it from them. So this is to tell us that, well, would they still do their piece of da'wah? Yes, they would still do their piece of da'wah, but then, of course, certainly, they would not accept it from them. So this ayah was letting us know that still you've got a responsibility. Let's look at this one. Ibn al-Mubarak. Man, I wish I had the time to talk about Ibn al-Mubarak. Okay, let's talk about Ibn al-Mubarak, what he had said. عليكم أنفسكم خطاب لجميع المؤمنين أي عليكم أهل دينكم. He said, this basically is a discourse that is informing or basically directed at all the believers, and therefore what it would mean is that you have a responsibility towards the people of your faith, exactly like when the ayah was saying وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, exactly like a comparison with the ayah when the ayah was saying do not kill yourselves. This wasn't necessarily talking about not committing suicide, although it can also mean do not kill yourself, to mean do not commit suicide. But the context of this ayah, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, the context of it was basically forbidding the Sahaba from leaving jihad, and that the consequence, if they were to leave jihad, was going to be coming at them, and therefore the enemies would come at them and basically attack them, and they would end up really being the reason for their own fate, the reason for their own demise. The reason for why they were killed was basically because they didn't do their piece of homework in jihad. So that basically made it easy for the disbelievers to simply attack you because you were not trained, you were not prepared, you were not doing your piece of homework, so you basically became an easy target. So this ayah, when it said do not kill yourselves, it was basically telling you do not be a cause to bringing your fate to yourself. And this is important to keep in mind. Well, this isn't just in killing, but that's also going to be including everything that you would do in life. That don't be the cause to bringing your own destruction. In other words, you have to do your own piece of homework, and don't necessarily get into a situation that you are needing help when you were supposed to be doing the necessary preparation, the necessary precaution to give you support in order to make things get in order. So فكأنه قال ليأمر بعضكم بعضا ولينهى بعضكم بعضا فهو دليل على وجوب الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر ولا يضركم ضلال المشركين والمنافقين وأهل الكتاب. Let's see. So he said, as if it is saying, so you must order one another for basically what is good, and you must forbid one another, and that this is an evidence that we are obligated to order for what is right and forbid what is wrong. And therefore, after basically doing our job, then this would mean that it wouldn't harm us after we do our piece of ordering for what is good. Then that's when, whether the disbelievers were misguided or whether the munafiqeen chose to stay on their hypocrisy and their self-manipulation, or whether the people of the book, they insisted that we're not going to accept your da'wah, we're just going to take our scriptures, etc. So therefore, that's when we would say, well, you do your homework, then if they still don't accept it, then you had basically done your piece, and the rest is on them. وهذا لأن الأمر بالمعروف يجري مع المسلمين من أهل العصيان كما تقدم. And he said that's basically ordering for what is good also is required upon the Muslims, even if we're talking about those that would commit sin. كما تقدم means he had talked about it before in other pages in the tafsir. Let's see. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib. Now, is it ibn al-Musayyib or ibn al-Musayyab? It's basically differences of opinions on whether it's Ibn al-Musayyib or Ibn al-Musayyab. Okay, well, who is Sa'id ibn Musayyib? We did talk about him before. He's basically the son of a Sahabi, okay, who refused to change his name, even though the Prophet ﷺ had given him a different name, but he insisted that he wanted to stay with his father's name. So he said, our father, he refused, and that's why until the time of today his name was Hazan, and he did not want to change the name Sadness, and he wanted to stay within that. And he said, we continue to be sad because my father refused the Prophet ﷺ's preference, the Prophet ﷺ's suggestion, and therefore, okay. So لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم بعد الأمر. Oh, right there. He said, what that means, it would not harm you if they had gone astray and you were on guidance after you had basically done your obligation, your religious duty in ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad. Let's do it again. لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم بعد الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر. Okay, let's look at right there. So where's this? أخرجه الطبري. Tabari again, he quoted this one. قال ابن خويزمنداد. Remember, we talked about Ibn Khuwaizmandad, and we basically said he is Iraqi from the Maliki madhab that was basically living in Iraq. He said, what this ayah contains is that a person is basically supposed to be considered over themselves first, and he's supposed to let go in commenting on people's mistakes and people's shortcomings, and perhaps even searching for what they are doing. In other words, Ibn Khuwaizmandad, he said, when we're speaking about tadammanat, we're speaking about that what includes, what we could derive from the ayah is that your priority is supposed to be focused on scrutinizing yourself, scrutinizing your sins, scrutinizing your shortcomings, and not scrutinizing people's shortcomings. In other words, yes, it doesn't mean to leave out ordering for what is good, but this is basically telling you that you have to focus on that, or I have to focus on that. And فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يُسْأَلُونَ عَنْ حَالِهِ, because at the end, you're not going to be asked about, they're not going to be asked about your situation, and basically, you're also, on Judgment Day, that is, you're also not going to be asked about their sins. So you would basically have to take the focus in focusing on your deeds. And that's similar to the ayah, كل نفس بما كسبت رهينة. Every single nafs is basically held accountable for what they had committed. So what is rahina? Rahina is hostage. Rahina is hostage. So what does a hostage have to do with bima kasabat? So it's like a metaphor telling the person every single soul, whatever they had committed, that's basically going to be what's holding them and what's keeping them basically captives, either within hellfire or in arasat yawm al-qiyamah, or on the fields of yawm al-qiyamah. It's basically the person's deeds. And similar to the other ayah, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. What is وَلَا تَزِرُ? The root is وَزَرَ. What does that mean? وَزَرَ means to commit a sin, a transgression. Okay? So do not commit a transgression over another transgression. So what does that mean? Means if someone's committing a transgression or a wrongdoing, don't fix basically the wrong with wrong. So in other words, if let's say someone, broke your window, don't go to their brother's window because person A refused to compensate you for breaking your window. Don't go to the person's brother because person A didn't compensate or didn't basically pay to fix your window. And don't go to their brother and attack their brother's window because he didn't compensate you for that. Because his brother is not responsible for what he had committed. All right? That's, in other words, don't make a mistake over somebody else's mistake. So what does that mean? In other words, don't commit a mistake by leaving da'wah, and don't commit a mistake in being too busy about people's sins and forget about your own shortcomings. So وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Focus on your shortcomings and not other people's shortcomings, but still do your duty in ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad. Let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, كُنْ جَلِيسَ بَيْتِكَ وَعَلَيْكَ بِخَاصَّةِ نَفْسِكَ. كُنْ جَلِيسَ بَيْتِكَ وَعَلَيْكَ بِخَاصَّةِ نَفْسِكَ. Let's look at this hadith. Could see, Imam Ahmad had narrated this hadith. When he says مطولا, it means there's more to this hadith. It was a long statement, but here al-Qurtubi basically just took an excerpt of it. Abu Dawud narrated it, Nasa'i, and it was narrated off Abdullah ibn Amr. When you see this Umar with a waw, that means Amr. Okay, not Umar. I know it's strange, but yeah. So they would put the waw when you see the word Umar, but then there's a waw at the end that means Amr. Okay, let's see. Radiallahu anhuma, because they're both Sahaba. Okay. قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كن جليس بيتك وعليك بخاصة نفسك. Be the person to stay and dwell within his home and focus on yourself. So why جليس بيتك? What is جليس? جليس means a person that prolongs sitting. So are we supposed to be like sitting down all the time at home? Not doing anything? No. This isn't what this is saying. This is saying at the time of fitna, avoid getting out of your house as much as possible. Why? Because the more you go out of your house, the more you would be exposed to fitna. The more you're exposed to fitna, the more it becomes normalized to you. The more it becomes normalized, the more you would start becoming susceptible to taking it as well. And probably engaging in the practices and not seeing the magnitude of their haram. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, "Kun jalisa baytik," this is very important. What we're seeing today is an encouragement, and the practice today is that get out of your home. The more you're at home, you're more going to go into anxiety, and hey, you need to see the world. And if you need a coffee, you basically get out to get a coffee. You get out and to basically just go and watch a movie, go out and get entertainment, go out and get some desserts, and go out, and you're basically constantly going outside. What's going to happen when you're constantly going outside? Of course, you're dragging your kids with you. What's going to happen? They're also normalizing all the culture that is a deviant culture. It basically becomes something, well, what's the big idea? Why not? It becomes a practice that they don't see anything wrong with it, and it becomes something that their mind would absorb as normal. What kind of culture are we talking about? Most cultures of fitna happen outside of our homes, not inside of our homes. Just keep that in mind. Most fitan happen outside of our homes, not inside of our homes.
And the problem nowadays is, well, it's a good thing sometimes for the internet, but other times, yani, it's just, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, Dora, but I think what's important is to just take the inspiration, and certainly, we're not going to take it as a verbatim here, because الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. Understanding the circumstances that you are in the West or in the East, or wherever you may be, understanding the situation. Some homes have more fitna than outside. So, you would have to not necessarily take every single quote as, literally, but you would have to understand the situation. So I agree with you that sometimes it's more fitna within our home than outside of our home. I agree with you on that. So then we would look at the circumstances, but generally speaking, avoiding, let's call it the outside world, whether we're speaking about outside world that you're getting access to it online, or whether outside world you're getting access to it basically in person. That's what you basically want to avoid in order to say jalisa baytik. But if you're jalisa baytik, if you're at home, but you're getting access to the outside world by watching movies, and you're like, I'm doing sunnah, I'm basically at home, but you're watching movies or you're playing gaming for hours, are you really jalisa baytik? Are you really exposed to the outside world virtually? So when it says jalisa baytik, it's trying to not put you in a ghetto per se, but it's trying to tell you that you want to avoid your interaction with the fitan that are exposed, that are normalized in the outside world. But it certainly does not mean staying at home and bring it within your home. That's even a bigger fitna. That's a bigger fitna if you're bringing the outside world inside your home than what you had done. You had expanded your home to make it exactly like the public place, another place of fitna. That's a pretty sad thing that many are doing. So when it says kun jalisa baytik, in other words, what you are supposed to be doing is that you are limiting the access of the outside world within your home. You're limiting their access within your home, and you're basically letting your home be an access between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an access where you're capable of preserving yourself to practicing the religion without the contamination that exists in the outside. Now, that's why when you look at kun jalisa baytik, you could also see within that majority of those that would get exposed to fitna are usually the extroverted. Be careful with this one. If a person is extroverted, they are more susceptible and more likely to fall in fitan than the person that is introverted. So should we encourage people to become introverted? Yes and no. No, because every single person basically was created with a certain personality, and comes with this certain personality a certain potential. So a person that is probably introverted has the potential to do what an extroverted does not have. So a person that's introverted is capable of excelling in mathematics, excelling in their homework, excelling in so many different things that an extroverted, probably they excel in maybe socialization, marketing, whatever it is. They're really extroverted, that they could reach out to the people, and they're capable of doing what other people that are introverted are not capable of doing. So an extroverted person is also needed because they'll probably have better techniques in doing da'wah than an introverted person. An introverted person probably has the ilm, but not necessarily the skill in giving da'wah. So we need both. But an extroverted person, they've got the skill to do da'wah, maybe not always the ilm, they can have the ilm, but an extroverted person has the skill to give da'wah. So if they're capable of doing what the other people are not doing, then certainly we would say do what other people are not capable of doing. Do your potentials in putting them in the right place and going out in public and doing that da'wah. And those that are not capable of doing that, then we would say do your homework and probably writing the books, publishing the books, and doing the da'wah. That's what you're good at, then do that piece of it. Now, here's one thing. But that still doesn't come with a certain catch. The extroverted, I would say, be careful, just like the Prophet ﷺ would tell certain Sahaba and give them a certain advice. One Sahabi, he would tell him, La taghdab, don't get angry. In other words, whenever you find yourself going to a tantrum, whenever you find yourself going into this highest level of anger, I want you to learn how to contain yourself. Okay, that's number one. When you would see other Sahaba approaching the Prophet ﷺ, he would give them a different advice. Another Sahabi, he would tell him to basically pray on time. Another Sahabi, he would tell him not to ask anybody. Well, not to ask anybody. What does that mean? It's basically telling him how to maintain his honor by not going out there and reaching out for people in assistance. So why would he tell him that? Well, that was probably his place of fitna. So a good mentor is not taking in one piece of advice, but is looking at the situation that these people are living in. And based on that, that would be the diagnose. And therefore, the prescription would be different. And this is important to keep in mind because the prescription that the Quran had given women was basically because of their personality, of their fitna, and what they're susceptible to. As an example, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ. But that was an order for the mothers of the believers. It's comprehensive. العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. It's comprehensive. It's not directed only at the women and the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, but it would also include us. The mu'mineen, the believers, the believing women. وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ. Avoid leaving the house and avoid going out there in public unless it was necessary, unless there was a need. But to go out there each and every single time and just having some time of exposure, etc. Now, why was that the case when it was talking about women, but that wasn't the case قَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ or قَرُوا فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ for men? You didn't see the same order because the man's responsibility was to do public service. The man's responsibility, your responsibility as a man to do public services, whether the public service meant jihad, whether it meant Salat al-Jumu'ah, whether it meant buying and selling, whether it meant going out there to reconciliate between people and etc. That's basically your public service. Were the women ordered the same thing? No. The public service, we were not even ordered for Salat al-Jumu'ah, even though if a man ترك الجمعة 3 times تهاونا بها. What is that? What happens? Well, basically they're considered as munafiqeen. But that's a man. But for a woman, no, even though it's such a big deal if a man were to leave Salat al-Jumu'ah. But it wasn't such a big deal if a woman were to leave Salat al-Jumu'ah. In fact, she wasn't even obligated for Salat al-Jumu'ah. When you're looking at طُمِسَ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ, meaning what? Their heart would basically be considered as stamped by a stamp that this person is a hypocrite for leaving 3 times Salat al-Jumu'ah. 3 consecutive Jumu'ahs. Okay? But that wasn't the case for women. So when you look at that piece of it, you could say that Islam does take in consideration not only female, but same thing when we're speaking about male in personalities, that when you want to mentor someone, it's important to take in consideration their circumstances, their personality, their potentials, and what their fitnas are, and then put that within the context. And then you're going to consider reading the best prescription to help them basically get into the guidance to maximizing good for their dunya and for akhirah, and certainly in the lens of going back to the Quran and Sunnah. Remember that. So now we're kind of getting into how do we understand كن جليس بيتك وعليك بخاصة نفسك. عليك بخاصة نفسك. In other words, your focus is supposed to be خاصة. خاصة means exclusive. خاصة نفسك, exclusively upon yourself. So that's what should be your main consideration. So what does that mean? Well, your main consideration should be your family, your children, your husband, yourself. That's supposed to be your main consideration. If you have the time to do more, then do more. Then you would be obligated to do more. But the first thing, make sure your deen is in place. Make sure your kids' deen is in place. Are they doing what they need to do? Is your husband doing what he needs to do? 2, enoughs. Are they healthy? Are they eating healthy? Or are they basically eating just frozen and packaged foods? Are you cooking at home? What's happening? What's happening in terms of their health? Are they going through obesity, or what's going on with their food? Are they eating the nutrients they're supposed to be eating? Are they healthy? Of course. Number 3, mental health. Are they getting their education? Are they doing their homework? Is anybody getting bullied that needs some focus, that needs consideration? What's going on here? There, number 4, their chastity. Are you teaching your sons and your daughters the wrong touch, the right touch? And are they basically here also taught about what it means to be modest, what it means to not look at haram things, what it means to maintain and preserve chastity? Family, are they being responsible at home? Are you the one that's doing everything for them? Are they picking up and doing up their chores at home, or are you doing it for them? Are you teaching them? Your main thing about parenting is to let your children learn how to become adults, because you want to keep in mind that in Islam, once they reach the age of puberty, they're considered adults. So your son, if he's 13, he should by now be capable of, 1, differentiating between tahara and najasa, even cleaning the bathroom, perhaps picking up his laundry. You don't need to pick up his laundry. He needs to know by now, should be able to do such responsibilities, be able to help and help even at home. And it's not considered necessarily, oh, that's a girl's job. No, even him be responsible. We would say even cats, they would basically go to their litter box and cover up what they had done. No one is supposed to be doing this for you, but we could help in as a family to support one another. But you also have to have some certain responsibility. Same thing for the girl. Are you learning? And of course, we talked about the children in terms of how we would be informing more informing the boys and giving them directions, and the girls more of direction than information. That doesn't mean that it's basically at the expense of the other, but of course the boys, their responsibility is to learn how to become leaders within their own household. So that doesn't mean I teach them how to bully, but it teaches them how to basically take responsibility over their own selves and recognize what needs to be done, and you do it yourself and don't wait someone else to do it for you. And an instructional parenting is basically giving my daughter, for example, instructions on what needs to be done, and even house maintenance as well, because she's going to be a mother. She has to learn how to do what is basically a responsibility that a wife or a mother is supposed to be doing. How to clean bathrooms, how to wash the dishes, how to clean the refrigerator, how to keep the maintenance, how to cook, doing all of that. And unfortunately, with feminism and with a society, with a modern society today, we're basically delaying that, and the girls would be 24 and they can't even fix a small meal. They're not even ready to become mothers, not even ready to become wives. Because if you were to look at the Quran and Sunnah, it basically considered that the first duty that a boy or a girl is supposed to learn is how to become, 1, responsible for their deen, 2, responsible for their health, 3, responsible for their mental health, responsible for the family and their relationship with the rest of their siblings and their own responsibility over their chastity, and 5, how to learn money management. Not because you want it, doesn't mean you have to take it. You have to learn how to do money management, teaching them how to do that. Okay. كن جليس بيتك وعليك بخاصة نفسك، ويجوز أن يكون أريد به الزمان الذي يتعذر فيه الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر، فينكر بقلبه ويشتغل بإصلاح نفسه. Qurtubi, of course, right there, he said, and it is possible that al-Qurtubi here saying that it was basically speaking about and referring to the age, referring to the time period when it becomes impossible to order for what is good and forbid what is wrong. So therefore, the person is basically left to hating or prohibiting what is wrong within their hearts, because if they were to talk about it, they might actually get perhaps persecuted for talking about the wronghood, or perhaps maybe who knows what type of harm that might come to them or at them. So وَيَشْتَغْلُ بِإِصْلَاحِ نَفْسِهِ. Then in that situation, that you would basically focus on fixing and basically maintaining your heart, maintaining your deen, making sure you're preserving your deen, and certainly working on your hidayah as well. Okay, I want you to look at this one. Al-Qurtubi wanted to comment on this hadith. And there was a strange hadith. And of course, when he said a strange hadith, he doesn't mean strange as the technical term for Tirmidhi, but something that was not necessarily seen in other narrations, at least, and therefore it wasn't something that was commonly known. And let's see, Ibn Lahi'a, even though he's not authentic, but let's look at over here. إذا قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا كان رأس 200 فلا تأمر بمعروف ولا تنهى عن منكر وعليك بخاصة نفسك. Said if 200 years pass, then don't order for what is good and don't forbid what is wrong. And just focus on yourself. And some scholars had said, well, that was mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ because تغير الزمان, the time changed and people, their circumstances basically had been contaminated, and very few people were supporting what is good. Okay. Now, here's one thing. I went to look at this hadith, even though, here we go. He said, وَلَمْ نَقِفْ عَلَى هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ. Stop right there. Pause right there. What does that literally say? لم نقف على هذا الحديث. It doesn't mean we couldn't stand on this hadith. No. لم نقف على هذا الحديث, meaning that they had done their research, which are the people that are doing tahqiq. They had done their research and they couldn't really find any authentic resources, or at least any wrong or even weak resources to help judge and determine whether this hadith is authentic or not. So didn't really have any resources to support or to even help them research it. So what does that mean? It's kind of like saying baseless. We don't have any basis for it. Well, baseless can have different connotations. Baseless can mean that this is wrong, and baseless could mean we don't have any resources to support it. So this baseless that we're talking about is basically to mean we don't have any resources to support this narration. I just wanted to mention this one. And because people would come to me, sending me a hadith and sending me ayat, and that's why it's important to attend the classes, because the most ones to ask are usually the least to attend. Not always, Noura, you're doing an excellent job, okay? Not always. This is, this is in general speaking about those that would have questions and not attend, not the ones that attend and have questions. The ones that attend and have questions are basically the ones that are being tentative in their listening. So that's thumbs up. Okay. The ones that have questions while and attending are basically the ones that were focused, the ones that were listening, the ones that were really paying attention. Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, but I'm talking about the ones that don't attend, but they would have a lot of questions. And of course, certainly we would say, I would recommend attending the classes because a lot of these questions would basically be answered during class, and it would give you more details to help you answer even more and more questions. And that way, you'll have more ilm to answer not only the questions that are probably coming to you now, but probably the questions that would probably become as follow-up questions. Okay, so I wanted to mention this hadith, even though it's not authentic, or at least we don't have any authentic or any basis for us to scrutinize and research this hadith, but I wanted to mention this hadith. And even if, let's assume, we do have a reference for it, let's just assume we did have a reference for it. He said, قال علماؤنا, our scholars, well, this is who's علماؤنا, basically the Maliki here, إنما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام ذلك لتغير الزمان, when time had changed. We're not talking about time in terms of years, okay? But this is actually talking about a metaphor, how people's behaviors, how, of course, their relationship with the world around them, etc., how that would basically change. And this is not talking about an issue of years, but this is talking about an issue of zaman, an issue of people and their relationship with the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how with time it had basically become forgotten. Okay, fasad al-ahwal. So this would explain in what this تغير الزمان was referring to. Fasad al-ahwal, meaning people's hearts became contaminated, their behaviors were basically going wrong, and قلة المعينين, very few people were giving support, very few people were giving basically assistance in doing da'wah, very few people were basically on the right path. So this would be relating to that. Okay, let's continue, inshallah. Okay, and it is 1:34. So we will stop right here, inshallah. And because, here we go. We'll stop right here, inshallah. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Any questions? No? All right. So what I'll do, I'll stop the live stream